Aloha, everyone. My name is David Louie, and thank you all for joining us here for the Hawaii Book and Music Festival today. And I have with me here a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Former Governor Neil Abercrombie, who served as the 7th governor of the state of Hawaii from December 2010 to December 2014. And before that, he served admirably in the State House of Representatives and the State Senate. And then he was elected to the U.S. Congress, where he served 10 terms and represented Hawaii at the national level. He served on the Armed Services Committee and the Natural Resources Committee. And then in 2010, he came back and ran for governor and then served as governor. And I am proud to have served with him. Governor.
Thank you very much, David. Aloha, everybody. I was taking a look at the festival poster there, and I saw that picture of myself as moderator. I very seldom have been a moderator, David, I think. And I thought to myself, why is that man smiling? Well, one of the reasons I am smiling today and smiling in that picture is to be a moderator for this particular session of From the Desk of the Attorney General. That's the book, which I have right here. I want to show everybody. Those pink slips there are all the places in the book that I'm convinced that David is absolutely wrong in what he's saying, because my name is involved in it right there. But the plain fact is that I couldn't be more pleased that you've written this memoir, David. It's really excellent all the way through. The cover, if people noticed on the cover, is of a desk. And that desk has a lot of meaning for you. And it has a particular meaning because of your career, the career that you had before you became Attorney General. You were Attorney General from 2011 to 14 through my term. And you've been a president of the Hawaii State Bar Association. You were a noted partner with Kobayashi, Sugita, and Goda. And a leading litigator and attorney in the most complex forms of law. And your name came to me as a result of a very, very good transition team who was out there looking for the very, very best person that we could get to be Attorney General. Because one of the important things that I think distinguishes Hawaii and distinguished your term is that you appoint, if you are governor, you appoint an attorney general. We don't elect attorney generals. And that was a key element in the decision that was made by me as to who the most capable person was of all of the names who came to me. And that was David Louie. So I couldn't be more proud to have the opportunity to moderate this memoir, David, as embodied in From the Desk of the Attorney General. And I'm hoping that perhaps you can elucidate for our audience just what that symbol on the cover of your book is all about and why that explains who you are as Attorney General.
Governor, thank you so much. And thank you for placing your faith and trust in me to be the Attorney General and to serve under you. It was really a terrific experience. I wrote this book as a memoir to encapsulate my experience in serving with you, in learning at the highest levels. You allowed me to sit in with you and be part of the conversation on many important issues and to see things in government. And I thought that I would share that with the people of Hawaii and all of my friends and other people who want to know about the intersection of power, politics, government, and law. The desk was the desk that I used when I was there at the Attorney General's office. And it was an old desk. It was an old historic desk that had been made in the 1880s, back when Hawaii was, even before it became part of the United States, when it was still a kingdom. And we restored that desk, and it was quite a labor of love to do that. But my observation was, like the desk, as we restored it and took away the layers of veneer and put it back together, it was sort of like government in some ways. It was old, it had been there, it was serviceable, it needed some work, and it needed some help, but it was tremendous, and it had a lot of aloha and a lot of substance to it. So that's why I wrote the book, and I hope people enjoy it, because what government is all about, which I know you did, was in solving problems, making people's lives better, and trying for everybody to move forward together.
What do you think about my proposition, so to speak, in the introduction, that by picking the Attorney General, there's a process involved, one that now does not exist. I guess I could say that you're the last Attorney General to be picked under the system that I approved of, that I stand by today, and which has been essentially overturned by the Judicial Selection Committee. I think it would be interesting for our listeners, our guests, to know a little bit more about that, as to what the Office of the Attorney General, in terms of its true independence, in terms of picking an Attorney General from the broadest possible and deepest possible foundation.
Right. So, Governor, the process of picking the Attorney General in Hawaii is still intact, and it still is a choice of the governor. And that's like the federal model, where the president picks the Attorney General. In most other states, the Attorney General is elected. But in Hawaii and 4 other states, the Attorney General is appointed by the governor. I think what you're referring to is the process of the selection of judges, which is through the Judicial Selection Commission, and is now one that involves the publication of the names. And it's come up recently in the news about that, so that the candidates, or the people of the top 4 to 6 names who are on the list, are known to the public. And sometimes they can try and stop people from being judges because of that process, which I don't think really serves the process. I think it's important that an elected official such as yourself, as the governor, has the right to pick the judges that should serve. And that's why we elect somebody like yourself.
Well, I brought that up in relation to my selection of you, because I was able to keep that process confidential. And just as you've just indicated, we can't pick judges from a confidential background anymore. It's so-called transparency. The idea of transparency means that instead of the broadest possible choices to be made, it's going to be actually narrowed down, because people like yourself, I don't think, if I had to picked from an attorney general or names of an attorney general that was out there being bandied about in the public before the choice, let alone with the judges as it is now, then people like yourself, particularly from the private sector, would be disenabled more than likely from being able to apply even in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. I think we do have a wonderful system here of picking judges through a merit selection process through the Judicial Selection Commission, and that's important. I do think confidentiality is important so that you can get the best people. The Judicial Selection Commission and the people of Hawaii have chosen to amend the Constitution to allow that process to have some names, not all of the names, but some names. And so that's a factor. But I think when you're selecting your attorney general as a governor, it's important for you to make that decision completely in a confidential manner.
Yes, thank you very much for that, David. And that leads me then to the kinds of discussions that we had when I was governor and you were attorney general. The confidentiality factor was really crucial there because there was so much controversy associated with many issues. And I thought maybe for our audience benefit, maybe we could pick a few of those, David.
Sure.
Pick two or three yourself. Let's start with whatever you think exemplified one of the let's say the toughest thing for you, not so much to decide, because in the end I had to make decisions based on the best information and perspective I could gather. But what would you say was the top issue that you had to face that you brought to me in terms of decision making?
Right, and there were several. There were big issues that I was fortunate and privileged to work with you on. And I think the biggest one and the one that I was most proud of for working on with you was the issue of marriage equality, same-sex marriage, marriage equity, which is today it seems so commonplace that everybody recognizes that gay and lesbian couples have a right to marry the person they love just like everybody else, and that's a basic matter of human dignity. But only just a short while ago, it was hotly contested, and it's still contested in some areas of the country. I don't think so much in Hawaii, and we can talk about that. I think that's important. And another one, which is really, really important to me, was the settlement of some Native Hawaiian issues that you and I worked on together, because Hawaii is so unique. It's the only state that used to be a kingdom that was overthrown illegally by the United States. And there's so many Native Hawaiian people here who, quite frankly, got the short end of the stick over the years. The state owes an obligation to them. And so there are issues, but these are very complex legal, political, and cultural issues, as you well know.
Yeah, you mentioned 10 terms in Congress. I recall one time when a very conservative Republican from Iowa was on the very much on the issue of the CACA bill, and it came to see me. And it was in our Interior Committee, our Resources Committee. And he wasn't on the committee, so he said, can I talk to you about this? What's all this about these Hawaiians? Why should they get special notice? And I said to him, Steve, I said, would you mind spending a few minutes with me so I can explain the history of the land tenure system in Hawaii from a kingdom to a shotgun republic, to a territory of the United States, to becoming the 50th state of the Union? He said, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, people who want to ignore history are doomed to repeat it, as that famous saying goes. But it's very important, and it's important in Hawaii that people understand what that history is, so that we can do right by the Native Hawaiian people.
And when you mentioned the issue of marriage equity, just there, same-sex marriage, marriage equity, equality, the words go back and forth, the phrases go back and forth because there's pejorative commentary that comes out of it. And you may recall, David, that when I brought up the idea of a special session, maybe we can explore that a little bit. Remember, I said to you, David, the ironic thing about this whole discussion that we're having about marriage equity, marriage equality, same-sex marriages, I said, 5 years from now, after we pass this, nobody will remember what the argument was about.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a signature issue, quite frankly. I remember it very well because it was very complex in a number of ways and very simple in a number of ways. The whole issue of same-sex marriage equity, it started with the Hawaii Supreme Court decision back in 1993, and they said. Justice Stephen Levinson wrote an opinion and said, "Hey, this is a basic human right. Equal protection means people can marry. You can't."
Wow, what a concept.
Yeah, I know. And that scared the living daylights out of all the people who hated gay and lesbian couples. And they rushed around the country and passed constitutional amendments prohibiting that so that they could be on an equal footing with the Equal Protection Amendment. And even in Hawaii, there was a backlash. There was a backlash in Hawaii, and Hawaii passed the constitutional amendment. But what was interesting was the constitutional amendment here said the legislature gets to decide.
Exactly.
It was very
David,
interesting.
That's an important point, David, because a lot of people forget about that. I remember very well being disappointing so many of my friends and supporters because I supported that constitutional amendment. They said, "How can you support that constitutional amendment? Because when you're for marriage equity, and this is against." I said, no. What this amendment does is says the legislature has to get the decision. I said, I've supported the commoners against the king, the legislature against the governor as a check and balance in government all my life. How can I say because there's an issue that I'm in favor of, I got to be against this amendment when it actually backs up what I've been in favor of all along in terms of the legislature? So the question of the bill then came up because that gave us an opportunity to actually directly affect the idea of whether or not it would be possible for everybody to get married.
That's absolutely right. And it was a super important distinction because all of these other legislatures went and passed constitutional amendments that prohibited same-sex marriage. And then you had to go through the complex process of reversing that through a constitutional amendment, which takes 2 or 3 years. And here we could reverse it just with the legislature passing a new law.
Okay, and that, David, can you run for our audience then? Run through why? See, you were the fulcrum in this. You, the Attorney General's office, that is to say, your able deputies. I came to you guys and said, you've got to give me the means to make this happen. Can you run through for our audience what did the Attorney General office do? In order, what process did you follow? What did you have to come to grips with in order to be able to say to me, okay, Governor, you can call a special session of the legislature now to address this bill?
Right.
I'm confident that this does the job. How do we get there?
Well, we had a lot of able people who did a lot of research, and we looked at it. It was a very complex thing because there were lawsuits that were filed against us already, against the state. To invalidate the prohibition. And there were lawsuits, in Hawaii, there was a lawsuit in California, there were lawsuits in many states, and there was a lawsuit that was making its way up to the United States Supreme Court. And then as all of that was happening, and we were defending the state in the lawsuits, and I remember having long conversations with you because you wanted to take the exact same view that President Obama took and that Governor Jerry Brown took and said, hey, this is wrong. We're not going to defend this law. But there were others in the legislature who wanted to defend the law. And generally, the Attorney General defends the laws that exist. And so we did two things. We gave you a team of deputies who said this is absolutely wrong. Same-sex marriage should be allowed. Marriage equity should be allowed. And we had another team of deputies that took the view of the legislature that said our laws have to be respected.
And I remember then in public, the newspaper, well, Abercrombie, how can you do two things at once? And I remember saying to him, it's easy. Ask David Louie.
And we did it. And the important thing is then the United States Supreme Court said, hey, same-sex marriage is absolutely allowed. Absolutely allowed. You cannot prohibit it. It is a prohibition is barred by the Equal Protection Amendment of the United States Constitution. And once that happened, then it was really just a matter of time of getting the legislature to move and to change the law. And I remember we had long conversations about doing that, and you had long conversations with the legislators, and a number of them wanted to just do it in regular session. And you had the foresight and wisdom to call a special session because just to focus on this gigantic issue. And that was a big deal. And I remember that special session. Okay. I know you remember it well because there were busloads of supporters and opponents coming in. There were demonstrations every day. There was press.
Night.
Yeah, and night. It went on into the night. And it went on for a couple of months. And the legislature, there's no way they could have done any regular business while considering this issue. So it was important that we had special session because it would not have happened without a special session. And so I was very pleased that, I testified in favor of it. There were very moving testimonies that were given by people. I remember Senator Gil Kahele, who's Kai Kahele's father, who gave a moving speech and talked about how mahus in the Hawaiian culture, Native Hawaiian culture, were respected and regarded as people to be respected, even though they were gay, homosexual, and there was nothing wrong with that. So there was a long tradition, but people tended to forget history. So some people were opposed to it. But after all of that, and then there was just lots of testimony, and finally the bill passed after a lot of hoopla. A lot of negative things were said, but I remember you had a great ceremony. We had a signing ceremony, and you brought Nanina Bear, who was the very first plaintiff who had filed the very first lawsuit back in the early 1990s, and that was the very first lawsuit. And you brought her in, and she was there at the signing. And I remember you said you read this letter from one of your friends that said, "Those who were invisible are no longer invisible and can be seen by everybody." I thought it was tremendously moving. I was very proud to just be a part of the whole effort.
Well, thank you very much, David, on that. But compliments go to the incredible work that was done by the staff. And maybe you could comment a little bit on that with another issue that we haven't mentioned just yet. I certainly want to get back to some of the Native Hawaiian side of things, but what about Turtle Bay? Because there was another situation in which I think the staff working with some of the other departments, the Land and Natural Resources, in other words, a multi-departmental effort had to be made, coordinated through the Attorney General's office to bring that about. And this involved actual negotiations. And I thought maybe you could, and you speak very well of that in the book. And I'd like you to go over a little bit of that for our audience.
Sure. Thank you, Governor. And that was, again, a huge initiative that was your initiative that I was really proud to be involved in. People in Hawaii have a much more developed sense of how important the environment is and how we have to protect it, how we have to protect the Aina. And so I remember what had happened is you had put a marker out early on in the legislative session and said, hey, we're going to get 40 million of legislative bonds and purchase a conservation easement, which means that you put restrictions on land so it cannot be developed. And you wanted to do that out at Turtle Bay, which was slated for a 4,000 person development with 5 different hotels and gigantic housing units and everything like that. And people out there were very upset about it. There was a whole movement about keeping the country. And anyway, I remember the negotiations had stalled, and your office called me up. We were right in the middle of the legislative session and said, hey, can you help? And some of my people in the Attorney General office had been working on this. They had been getting valuations, but we had not been able to bring it to fruition. And so I came in I looked at it, I met with the deputies, I met with the appraiser, and then I met with you. And I remember that the key thing, and this is one of the things that, that I really admired about you, was your ability to make a decision and to make a deal. And I remember you telling me, go cut the deal. Okay. We've been horsing around here for a while and we don't have a deal. Let's go cut the deal. And so I sat down, I met with the representative from Turtle Bay. They had a reason they wanted to do this. This would take this would get a bunch of money in their pocket, and it would take some litigation headaches off of their table. There were other people who too, the Nature Conservancy, the Land for Public Trust. There were other organizations who contributed money. The city of and county of Honolulu contributed money, but we sat down and we were
I think my deputy, Blake Oshiro, and some of the other folks in my squad, if you will, were involved in it. And the reason I bring that up is that in order to, if you're going to negotiate, you have to do it, and you have to have everybody there at the table who's involved in the decision making. Because in the end, you're right. I had to say yes or no, and I wanted to have something on the table to say yes or no to.
Right. And so we were able to make a deal. We working with Blake, who's a terrific fella. He did a great job, and we were able to cut a deal with Turtle Bay and bring all these parties there. We had a number of contingencies, but then the important thing was, because it was so late in the session, the legislature had earmarked all the money already. And so we had to go negotiate with the legislature to go get $40 million of bonds. And we had to get Calvert Young, your budget and finance chief, to come up with some creative ways. And we did it. We were able to get 40 million of commitment. We set aside 665 acres out at Turtle Bay. We still allowed them to build a few hotels, I think 3 hotels and some lesser housing units, but we took away 665 acres from development. It's now preserved as wild, pristine beaches and wildlands for people to hike on, walk through, enjoy, and be preserved for future generations. And so I was really proud to be part of that. That was a tremendous environmental thing that we were able to do.
Well, speaking of future generations then, and we've already mentioned some of the issues around Native Hawaiian interests and concerns, perhaps you could go into that a little bit, because we were dealing with issues, and particularly in Kaka'ako Kai and Kaka'ako Mauka and Oha.
Absolutely. So one of the interesting things when I came into office was that there had been debts owed by. So let me back up a little bit. The Constitution of Hawaii sets forth obligations of the state to both the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and also we created the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And this is before my time, but it was created.
Well, as a matter of fact, just for perspective's sake, for our audience, that was created when I was in the legislature in the 70s under the very able leadership, Ways and Means Chairman of Ben Cayetano and Frenchie DeSoto and some other. Most everybody associated with that has passed on to their rewards. Ben and I are still paying for our sins, but. We put that together specifically because the idea, the motivation was, shouldn't Hawaiians be in charge of their own destiny to the extent and capacity that's available to us? Because with the original entering into the 50 states, and the 49 and becoming the 50th state, what had been royal lands, what had been ceded lands, and so on, were specifically set aside in terms of benefit for Hawaiians in recognition of that. And so the original Office of Hawaiian Affairs was not meant to impose the state further on Native Hawaiians, but rather to give Native Hawaiians an opportunity to have real sovereignty with respect to the lands that had previously been associated with the kingdom.
Absolutely. And that's an important thing, and it's an important recognition by the state. But then always the devil's in the details. And so the
legal details.
The legal details, and that's where the Attorney General comes in. And the state had said that one of the 5 purposes that was OHA was supposed to be funded out of these royal lands that had been given back. They were ceded. They were the royal lands that had been given over to taken actually, not given over, taken by the federal government. And then those were given back in large part, not all. There's still a number of federal lands that are former Hawaiian lands. But they were given back to the state of Hawaii, and they are known as the ceded lands. And they have revenue from them, from the airport and from various places. And a portion of that revenue was to be given to fund OHA. But the devil is always in the detail as to how you calculate that. And so there had been these long-standing disagreements between OHA and the state auditors and accountants and budget and finance as to how much they were entitled to and how you would calculate that. And those had been going on for the last time it had been settled as to an amount was 30 years before. And so for 30 years, there'd been this long-running dispute. And the number, according to the Native Hawaiians, according to OHA, was somewhere $400 to $600 million. And the state obviously disputed that, and the state thought it was much less. But we recognized that there was some amount owed. And the question was, what?
The question was, could we make a deal?
Exactly. And Ben Cayetano tried to settle this. He couldn't settle it. Governor Lingle tried to settle it. She couldn't settle it. People had been doing it for a long time. And so finally, it came to me and it came to you. And you said, let's go make the deal. Okay. That's the difference.
The answer previously, of course, had been around money. And I thought, well, what about the land then? Because we're not making any more of it. What about land and the money that could be made from that land? That was kind of, I was thinking, okay, how do we get around this? How do we get through it? How do we get under it? How do we get over it?
That's absolutely true. And also, when you and I first came into office, we were in the throes of the Great Recession. We were still in it. There was no money. We were underwater. You were looking everywhere, under every rock and cranny for money to help run the state.
We were $250 million in deficit the day I walked in the door.
Right. And so to get money to give to OHA was going to be impossible. And there had been some prior land deals on the table. But in order to get a land deal, if you're going to give any land in Hawaii that is state land and transfer it to somebody else, even if it's another agency in the state, you have to get legislative approval. And so some of the prior initiatives had foundered and on the rocks of getting legislative approval. And so we were able to cut a deal, and basically we said, look, we'll give you some land. They had in prior times, some Native Hawaiian groups had objected to the selection of lands. And so I remember talking with you, and you said, look, let's take the best lands that we have and that are being underused and underutilized by the state. And
that are worth real money.
That's right. And that was Kaka'ako Makai. And by just saying, well, look, how about if we give you guys 200 million, roughly, plus or minus. We're not going to have a true up. We're not going to have an accounting. We're not going to fight over pennies. We'll give you parcels of land that make up approximately 200 million, and we'll settle this debt. And we reached agreement with them, and they were agreeable. I worked with Bill Mehiula, who's a fine Native Hawaiian attorney who represented the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and was able to cut the deal. Charlene Ina of my staff was very instrumental in helping to cut the deal. And we went in and cut the deal. And then we had to sell it to the legislature. And that was its own challenge in order to get that through. But you and your staff worked the political angles on that and got that through. And Bill and OHA, that was Chair Colette Machado, who was very instrumental in this, they had to go out and sell it to the Native Hawaiian community.
When you say Bill, you mean Bill Isla?
No, Bill Mehiula. Bill Isla was
sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Bill Mehiula was the attorney who represented OHA. Bill Isla was a prominent Native Hawaiian person who was the chair of the Department of Land and Natural Resources.
Yeah.
So we were able to get the deal done, and then transfer a number of the parcels to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs in Kaka'ako, Makai. And that remains, they've been talking, and I'm hopeful that they will be able to make something of that. They would like to get some residential permission, but that's a difficult area. And they have the opportunity, I think, to try and make something of that there. And it's worth real money. It's very valuable land.
So in other words, at this stage, then, if the Hawaiians want to have control over their destiny, they're also going to then have to engage in politics and deals.
Absolutely. And that's always, that's the difficulty for all of us. That's sort of the conundrum of a democracy and the form of government we have is you actually have to listen to the other guy who has an opposing point of view and sit down and try and figure out where you have shared values and shared goals so that you can make a deal and move forward together.
Well, that's not so different than what your work had been in the private sector up to that time. So maybe you can differentiate for us if the process seems similar and the whole idea of finding common ground works in as much for a litigator and a plaintiff's attorney as it does for a government official, someone charged with protecting and advancing the public interest. How do you compare and contrast then your work, your years of work, decades of work in the private sector, and then what happened from when you became Attorney General, and how do you see that now in retrospect?
Yeah, it was fascinating for me to move from the private sector, where I spent my whole career as a litigator fighting over money. That's what civil trial attorneys do. They fight over money. I was generally on the defense side, but sometimes I would represent some plaintiffs. But generally, that is what our system uses to settle disputes, is pay somebody money. It's a wealth transfer device. But, when I became, and it was interesting, when you're a private attorney, your goal is to represent your client. You're supposed to represent that client to the best of your ability. But when I became Attorney General, I realized that my client was the state of Hawaii and the 1.4 million people. And I had to think about not the narrow interest of a single client and how they could prevail over somebody else, but how we could do what was best for everybody and work with you and try and figure out what is the best thing. What is the best solution for the state and the community, which is a very different perspective from being a trial lawyer, a kind of a hired gun and just going guns blazing on behalf of your narrow client's interests. So
you remember when we talked about that, I said to you, David, one of the things you have to remember as Attorney General and giving advice on it is where government is concerned, where the common good, where the public good is concerned. Several things can be true at once. It isn't just one thing is true. You can have several things that are true. And I think the phrase that I used at the time, and I believe you quoted in the book, I'm trying to remember, maybe it's just sympathetic magic on my part, I hope it's in there, was that everybody has special interests, because that was the whole idea. Well, are you going to back these special interests against the public good? And I remember I said to you that I said everybody has special interests. Every single person does. You do. You're a father. You're a son. You got an ethnic heritage. A gender. So much money. Live in a certain section. that kind of, you can have a dozen special interests come up. The question isn't whether you have a special interest, it's whether your special interest prevails against the public interest and the public good. That's the difference. If your special interest and the public interest coincide, then you have to pursue it.
And that's absolutely right. And I think that was the one of the things that I learned, in working with you and the people on your team, was that, some people demonize special interests. Okay. I mean, the idea is all special interests are wrong. Well, I don't think that's true. I think you have to be careful. I mean, obviously, the mother's milk of politics sometimes is money, and money can be a dangerous, pervasive influence. If you have, remember Governor Rod Blagojevich of Illinois, who wanted to sell the Obama Senate seat for millions of dollars.
You mean the member from Illinois who had a seat right next to me on the Armed Services Committee? Yes. When you have special interests and you have moneyed interests, I've always thought, and it's kind of, I thought of politics as, and sort of apt for Hawaii, as a sumo match. You had a bunch of naked or half naked interests pushing each other around, trying to gain dominance. And sometimes that happens. And it's very important that people in government understand that process, but it's not totally evil. You have to be careful of the influence of money, and you have to not allow your compass to go awry, and you have to not be seduced by the money, but you can use special interests. And if the special interests align with the public interest, and as long as the special interests do not take precedence and dominate the public interest, then we can have a win-win situation. That's at least how I regarded it, and I thought that's how you regarded it. As opposed to just doing what you want to do. I remember very, very well. I remember speaking to you about needs and wants. If I right now, David, I think your image is frozen. Oh no, there now you're back. Remember when I was talking about? I said that okay, how do you do that? How do you determine is the public interest and the special interest coincide? And if so, to move forward, how do you do that? I said, remember when I was the subject matter chair for higher education in the state legislature and on the appropriations committee at the same time. So the Ways and Means chairman was Mamoru Yamasaki from the island of Maui. Old school Maui plantation born, raised, and bred politician who reminded everybody of Yoda in Star Wars. He sat there in his office in his chair, surrounded by decades of Ways and Means books and ledgers all around him. And I went in and I made my presentation for the University of Hawaii budget. And I had my plans down, A, B, C, and D, and 1 through 25. And I went through the whole thing, no notes, anything. I had it down. Abercrombie knew what he wanted. He knew how to say it, and he got it done. And Mamoru Senator Yamasaki just looked at me the whole time, never said a word. And at the end, he leaned forward and he said, Neil, he said, that was an excellent presentation. That was one of the best presentations, one of the best budget summaries I've ever heard in all my years in the legislature. Now that I know what you want, tell me what you need and I'll see what I can do.
Exactly. And I think that's the same thing is that when we start demonizing special interests, when we start demonizing the other side, we lose sight of what we can do together, which is what are the values, what are the shared values that we have, and what's possible. I mean, that's what they say. They say politics is the art of the possible, right? It's you got to work on that and try and figure out how you get it through. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that the one thing I learned was, no, we shouldn't demonize the other side. You can't retreat to your bubble. You got to listen to the other side, and you got to talk to them and try and figure out. I mean, some of them are crazy. I mean, there are some people who participated in the January 6th insurrection. There are some people who are want to take a horse wormer medication instead of a vaccine. I think that's crazy, but I will listen to them and try and convince them otherwise. So I think that's what we have to do.
Well, it seems to me what you're saying is politics is not for the faint of heart. And in as much as, I mean this, it's one thing if you're like me, that had been really a public servant all my life, and a probation officer, a teacher, a state legislator, well, actually, yeah, I guess every office for 5 decades. I've held an office of one kind and in one form or at one level or another for more than 5 decades. So that I'm a lifer in the system. But speaking as someone who decided he wasn't faint of heart, what would you say, or what would your summary be, in as much as I think we're getting a little bit near the end of and I hope maybe some folks have some questions or comments they'd like us to make an observation on. What would you say then for those, especially in the context that you just cited, when the cynicism that's out there, the destructive nature of politics, the public ranting and bullying that seems to be, that is taking place, the cyber world of vengeful commentary and viciousness that's out there. What about it? Is it just faint of heart, or is it a sensible thing not to get involved in as from the private side of life in political service? Not talking about running for office. I'm not talking about becoming a professional politician, like yours truly, but participating as a citizen. What do you have to say, Citizen Louie, having been dragooned into being Attorney General, probably against your better judgment because of the mellifluous tones of Governor Abercrombie saying, "You're going to love this, David." What would you say today then to the folks that are out there who are saying, "Wow, this is something I don't want to be a part of"?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important that people participate and make their voices heard. And the reason I say that, and I also think it's hugely important that people in the private sector consider being on a board or commission, consider dipping their toes into the waters of public service. And the reason why that's important is everybody's voice needs to be heard. And the whole system, our system is built upon the consent of the governed. It is not, Governor, you get to wave your magic wand and make everybody do something. That it doesn't work like that. The people who are the populace need to make their voices heard so that people can move and so that we can all get along together. So I think that's important. I would encourage people in the private sector to participate. It's hugely important, and also it's necessary. If you're not going to participate, if you're not going to vote, if you're not going to support candidates, then how can you complain when you sit back and you say, "Oh boy, that's all screwed up"? You had the opportunity, you have the chance to participate. And it's also important, let me just finish the thought there, Governor. It's also important not to demonize the other side. I think one of my great good friends, Sid Kanazawa, who's a great mediator, but he was a great litigator. He taught me, he said, when he'd get a new case, and he didn't know the other attorney, he'd call him up and say, "Let's go have lunch. And let's talk about you as a person and me as a person and our backgrounds. We're not even going to talk about the case." And the other attorney would look at him and was like, what are you crazy? What are you trying to pull the wool over my eye or something like that? He says, "No, I just wanted to get to know you so that when we talk about the case, we can see if we have some common shared values."
Well, if you look over my shoulder, David, and the view that I have here, over my shoulder there is a picture of Barack Obama, Senator Barack Obama, and myself at the Hilton Hawaiian Village, Tampa Ballroom, back in 2006 when he was elected to the Senate in the state of Illinois. And I remember, and of course he would come out every Christmas and visit his then living grandmother, and help helped to raise him. And I said, the Democratic Party would like to have a gathering to congratulate you and show our support for you. And he said, well, who's going to come to that? It's Christmas time and nobody will show up. Well, of course, hundreds of people showed up at the, and I introduced him as Hawaii's third senator, coming from Hawaii. And I remember he said one of the jokes that they used to tell was each other with his old friends was, he said, well, how are you going to handle prejudice? How are you going to handle discrimination? And Barack would say to him, I think they'll forgive me for going to Punahou. and so he represented then hope and change. And it's under, and that's how he carried. I said to him at the time, you're riding a wave, and we all know all waves dissipate in the sand eventually. You either ride it or it passes you by or passes over you. And of course, he rode that wave into the presidency. He represented hope and change. And I can tell you for a fact, David, that the reason that I was privileged to pick you as Attorney General is that you represented to me the change that was needed in order to carry Hawaii forward and the hope that I think everyone has that we're worthy of our democracy here in Hawaii and hopefully in the nation. So I'm very, very grateful I had the chance to moderate this session. And I certainly hope that people will be on the lookout for From the Desk of the Attorney General, a memoir by David M. Louie. And perhaps you can give us a little bit of the publication schedule and so on now.
Sure. It's being published by Legacy Isle Publishing, which is associated with Watermark Publishing. They're local Hawaii publishers. And so I chose a local Hawaii publisher to do this and to work with me on this book, and they were gracious enough to do so. And so the books are on pre-order right now. I think you have to Google. There's some website, but if you Googled From the Desk of the Attorney General.
Can you read that, or is it? Of course, it comes up backwards in my.
Yeah, no, they can read that. They can read that. If you hold it up a little bit more, Governor, you can see the desk pull. The desk pull, which I really loved, was this brass desk pull on that desk, which had a palm tree on it. And this is from the 1880s. This was one of the first signature desks that was built by a number of Hawaii craftsmen. Which you restored. Yes. But the Chief Justice has one. You had one. You used one. You used it. And there was one used by Duke Kahanamoku when he served as the sheriff of Honolulu. So there were 13 of these desks, and they were a historic group of desks. And I was so pleased to be able to do that.
Well, you had the antique desk, and now I'm the antique. So, yeah, you'll have to catch up with me on that.
So, the one thing I learned, and thank you for your kind words, Governor. I really did enjoy serving with you, and I was very pleased that you put your faith and trust in me to try and do right by the people of Hawaii. And I think I learned a lot, and that's what this book is about. Is the observations I made, some of the characters that not you, but some of the other characters that I interacted with, and some of the things I learned and the insights I had. But I really learned. I got to tell you, a lot of people think that government is a black box. They think it's a mystery. They have no idea how it works, and they just go, "Geez, this is not working for me." But when you really get under the hood, you pop open the hood and you look at it, you figure out it's just like anything else. There's a bunch of people there. They have processes. They're trying to do right, and they're trying to follow a process. And that's what the Attorney General is all about, is being a guardian of the process, to make sure that things are done in a fair manner. So I really thank you for that, Governor. Thank you.
I'm happy to have done it. I see that the real moderator has entered the picture, at least into my Kuleana here. And do we have any questions or observations we should comment on, or are we getting thrown?
I have a question for David. Was he ever tempted to run for public office after that experience?
You know, thank you for that question, Roger. I was not tempted. Running, you know, my hat is off to people who run for public office, like the governor. And that is a long, hard slog. And I have friends who have done it, but I was not tempted to do it. I've been more of a guy to sit, you know, in the room and try and do the work and you know, be a lawyer or something like that. And so I don't think I was cut out for that.
I've been fascinated. You know, the chair of the Hawaii Book and Music Festival is Doug Chin. And I've been fascinating watching his career because he was a terrific manager and administrator. He ran for office, but I've never thought he really had the kind of crowd-pleasing personality that's right. He's not a glad hander. He's just a terrifically hard worker and an extraordinarily intelligent person. I think he's relieved not to be pursuing it any further.
Well, you know, I supported Doug. I remember he called me up and wanted to have lunch. And I thought, you know, he was in private practice. I was in private practice. And he wanted to talk about something. I thought, oh, you know, maybe he wants to talk about a case or something like that. And he said, I might have this opportunity to serve as the Attorney General. What do you think? And I said, pick up the phone right now and call the governor and say yes. You will never have a better job, ever. This is the best job I ever had, quite frankly. The most fun, the most legally enticing, the most complex job I ever had. I think Doug served well and ably as Attorney General. He served well and ably, you know, as a lieutenant governor, you know, and then he tried to run for Congress, and unfortunately that didn't work out. But you know, it's great that he made the contributions that he has made all along in his career. I'm very, very pleased to know him.
He may be called to office again, so who knows? No.
Absolutely.
Regardless of what he thinks today. You know?
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you both very much. It was really instructive.
Can I say one last thing, Roger, in that regard? And I'm sure David agrees with me on this. In fact, we spoke just about it just yesterday. The Constitution, which is under attack right now by the former president and those that have this authoritarian orientation, and I think a violation of constitutional principle. The Constitution does not guarantee us good government. It guarantees us the opportunity for good government. Whether we get good government depends on the talent in the room. That's what we have to have, people who are committed. We have to have people who understand what the Constitution is about. We have to have people with integrity and talent. That's what David Louie had, and that's why this state was well served with his tenure as Attorney General. Thank you, David. Thank you, Roger. Thank
you so much, Governor. Thank you, Roger.
Mahalo nui.